Okay. Yeah, so before it is a pretty big topic. I just wanted to, like Pastor has been speaking about, what does the Bible say about forgiveness and all of that. But I thought I will just start off by asking all of you, what do your friends, your colleagues, like people who are not Christians, what do they say about forgiveness? So if, you can call out the answers. It's fine. What do you think is forgiveness for them? Forget it ever happened, okay? Letting it be. Going on, okay? Okay. Karma, okay? Within yourself? Yeah. Dharma, okay? Any other? What else? What are the common, phrases or things that, you find your friends telling you, like, when they're stuck in a conflict or when they're angry? Give but never forget. Wait for a chance to give it back, right? Yeah. Forgive yourself. Is that what you said? Okay, okay. So what's the point of forgiving? Because they'll do it again. Okay. Any other? My own peace of mind. Okay. Forgive yourself first to forgive others. Okay. What is that? Revenge is best served cold, it seems. Served cold. Okay. Any other? Okay, so you can see, like from these different definitions, like how people of the world think about forgiveness, right? So usually it is more about like peace with yourself, or okay, just let it go so that, like the two of you can be at peace somewhat, you can just sort of get along somehow. But nowhere in this whole thing, like, has anybody mentioned like peace with God, right? That you have a, that there is any kind of forgiveness or any aspect of God that comes into it. It's just, like, okay, let's see, let's let it slide. Different versions of it, right? We bury it or we jump over it, something like that, right? So what we're going to talk about today is something different. And we want to really see how the biblical view of forgiveness is different from the world. Because unless we see that, there's no point. Because we have so many people around us giving us a lot of different messages, and we might be in conflict with them. Sometimes people around us who are not Christians also, we could be in conflict with them. And if we just do the same thing that they do, then there wouldn't be much of a difference between somebody who is a Christ follower and someone who's not, right? So today, like, I'll just so a lot of what I'm going to be sharing today is taken from Ken Sanday's peacemaking model. Okay, so biblical peacemaking model. So these are ministries that do reconciliation and forgiveness between people, between organizations, between churches. So they have years of experience of helping people. Forgive each other and work through conflicts and work through unforgiveness. And they have a certain model that they follow, right? And the model is based on the biblical view of forgiveness, okay? What, in the Bible, forgiveness is, it involves three dimensions of peace. It's not just internal peace, that's with yourselves, right? It is peace with God, peace with others, and peace with yourself. All three are equally important. Okay, none of these can be misplaced. All three are, as important as the other. And that's the way that God presents, the idea of forgiveness to us, which brings a very different kind of this thing for us. When we think of how we can reconcile with others, how we can, deal with anger with others, how we deal with disputes that come along, with our friends and others. It's hard work to work on three aspects. For us, like just working on one aspect itself is bad enough, right? Just to feel that, okay, like, I've put it behind me, I can sleep tonight. That itself is hard enough. And, uh, and if you have gone through unforgiveness, which I'm guessing most of you have, including the person who's speaking to you, okay? So you will know how difficult this is, and depending on the kind of disputes that you have gone through, the kind of conflicts that you have experienced in your life, this could be, the unforgiveness can be something huge that has been there in your life, that has sometimes taken over your life, or it could be just something very small that you've experienced. But either way, just take a look at these three. Think of the most recent, you know, uh, difference or conflict or something that you've had with somebody, whether it's someone who is Christian, somebody who's outside the church, or whatever it is. Think of the most recent one that you've had, or the one that you're going through, whichever. And as I go through this presentation, I would like you to keep that conflict in mind, right? And I want you to evaluate, because I know that for sure each of you has thought about this topic in different ways. Maybe some of you have read a lot about it. You've gone through your own personal challenges with it. But here, when you're sitting here, don't just sit here to evaluate what I'm going to say, okay? What I have to say is just one piece of the whole thing, right? And as Gia put it in the morning, you have stage fright, mama, and I do, okay? So I may not present it that great, but I do want you to listen to what I have to say, and I want you to use that to evaluate, what is going on within yourself. Because as I was preparing for this, I was thinking, if only I thought about this much before, I think I would have handled some of the conflicts in my life, some of the unforgiveness in my life so differently. And just to want you to evaluate your own conflicts on the basis of this. Okay, so just to get started, what we can do is I'd like you to be in groups of 4. Okay, so just wherever you are, just turn around. Just make sure you're in a group of 4, nothing more. Okay, unless you really can't help it. Group of 4. And as you can see on the screen, okay, I want you to discuss in your groups, in what ways have you seen unforgiveness affect you personally? So now, before you start thinking that I want you to start telling all your personal stories, no, not really. Okay, that's not really what I'm asking for. I don't want you to give the situation to each other. Okay, but can you at least share how did it impact you, right? Uh, how did it impact you emotionally? How did it impact you mentally? How you function, or you can even just think of those 3 dimensions we spoke about. How did it affect the way you interact, how you were with God, the way you were with others, and the way you were with yourself? So that part I would like you to share. So you don't have to share the context necessarily, okay? So you can just go ahead and share. How has, any time, any unforgiveness, whatever you have experienced, it could be a very small thing also. Can you all, yeah, like, We can wind up in another 2 minutes, okay? So, yeah. Any groups that are not done? Another minute, just. Okay, let's stop. Yeah. Okay, there are quite a few groups, but I think what I'd like, I don't want to like call out somebody from each group, but maybe, from the groups, you can just call out some of the things you heard, like how did it affect people spiritually, like in their relationship with God, right? How did it affect others, their relationship with others, or how were they with themselves, right? So you can just call out like different things, and if any other group has any different response, you can also share that.
From our, yeah, so the one thing that we were discussing is how it occupies our thoughts all the time. Because until we forgive them, we would keep on thinking about it. So, yeah, that's one thing that we were talking about.
So from our group, on respect to God, most of them it disrupted their spiritual life because of a grudge or with the person. Yeah, they were bitter to somebody, and that was on respect with God. Maybe maybe like just whenever they on from very basic from praying to even doing a daily stuff, and it comes to the point where even taking a holy communion was also difficult. So because
Yeah,
of this,
sure, sure. Yeah, you can pass it. With others,
One common thing that we notice, like everyone shared, they lose the peace of mind. Usually, they don't interact. They have certain, like, they overthink a lot and also distance themselves from prayer and reading Word of God. Yes.
sure.
Yeah, relationship with others. Um, there's definitely distancing oneself from other people, self isolation also. There's also manipulation, narcissism, sadism, all of that involved. And eventually, it goes really dark, and you're in a place of self righteousness. And
Sure.
yeah.
Any other responses? Anything to add?
So, so, so what we actually spoke about, it's how it actually affects us personally, and what we actually spoke is how it actually affects how we see people after the issue has been done, and we
How do we
actually
see
tend to
people?
say that we forgive the person, but actually it hasn't been actually been done, because if the issue keeps on recurring, we'll actually bring up the whole history from the back. So why should we actually forgive this person in the first place? And because of this issue, we might actually respond in such a way that we can't actually take it back. And and in that case, we need forgiveness. So we'll actually be in a loop, in a sense that we want forgiveness, but we don't want to forgive the other guy.
Sure, sure. Any other different point than what has already been shared? All right. I think you all discussed that very well. Yeah. So I think most of you would have seen, like, yeah, when we are offended, right? We get into either ways that we try to escape from the situation, or we try to attack, right? And these are the different things. And I think many of you spoke about it as well. We withhold forgiveness, keep dwelling on what's wrong. You get cold and distant. Sometimes you just give up. You cut off from the relationship completely, right? Or you might be inflicting some pain on the other person. You could manipulate them, right? You can go behind their back and gossip, or you give it back really well. You retaliate, right? And you could even plan and scheme things for their downfall as well. So these are a few things. There could be other ways that we would respond as well, but these are typically ways that many of us respond in the natural, right? I think many of you have mentioned it as well, so we have gone through it. But I would like you to also think, what have Christ's responses been when he's offended? Okay, I'd just like you to take a minute to think about that. Think of the times that Christ has been offended, and how has he responded? I guess most of you might agree that it's quite different from all the responses I posted up just before, or the ones that you have shared as well, right? Is there anyone who thinks it's very similar to whatever we have said so far? No. Okay. So, Joanna, you can help me with the video now. Huh? Okay, there's a video that I would like you to listen to.
It was some time ago that I was in Berlin. And there came a man to me and said, Mr. Bohm, I am glad to see you. Don't you know me? And suddenly I saw that man. That was one of the most cruel overseers, guards, in the concentration camp. And that man said, I'm now a Christian, I have found the Lord Jesus. I read my Bible and I know that there is forgiveness for all the sins of the whole world, also for my sins. I had forgiveness for the cruelties I have done. But then I have asked God grace for an opportunity that I could ask one of my very victims forgiveness. And Fräulein ten Boom, once in you forgiven, will you forgive me? And I could not. When I was in a concentration camp, one of the most terrible things I had to go through was that they stripped us of all our clothing. And we had to stand naked. The first time was the worst. I said, Betsy, I cannot bear this. And suddenly suddenly it was as if I saw Jesus at the cross. And the Bible tells they took his garments, he hung there naked. And I knew he hung there for me, for my sins. And by my suffering, I understood a fraction of the suffering of Jesus Christ, and it made me so thankful that I could bear my suffering. I remembered the suffering of my dying sister to him. But when I seen that I could not forgive, suddenly I knew I myself have no forgiveness. You know that Jesus said that? When you do not forgive those who have sinned against you, my heavenly Father will not forgive you your sins. And you all was not ready for Jesus because I have no forgiveness for my sins. I was not able, I could not, I could only hate him. And I took one of these beautiful texts, one of these boundless resources, Romans 5:5. The love of God is shed abroad into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who is given to us. And I said, thank you, Jesus, that you have brought into my heart God's love through the Holy Spirit who is given to me. And thank you, Father, your love stronger than my hatred and unforgiveness. That same moment, I was free. And I could say, brother, give me your hand. And I shook hands with him. And it was as if I felt God's love streaming through my arms. You never touch so the ocean of God's love as that you forgive your enemies. I can't either.
Okay, so that was, Corrie Ten Boom. Many of you may have read her story or, watched videos and things like that, who was in the, German concentration camps at Ravensbrück, and yeah, she tells you exactly what she went through, right? Such inhumane treatment, stripped of all their dignity, stripped of everything, and made completely helpless by other human beings, right? And she also watched, her sister being killed at the hands of this very man who later comes to her and asks for forgiveness, right? So I'm not sure that any of us have really gone through this level of inhumanity or indignity being put onto us. But look at what she says. Can you forgive? No. I cannot either, but he can, right? And I think that is the basis of biblical forgiveness, which Pastor and all has been trying to share. I just wanted to share the story. I wanted you to listen to it in her own voice, because just imagine how much it would have taken for her to, reach out to this man, whom I know it's any of our guesses if we saw somebody like that in that type of situation, what we would have done, and I think we would have justified it as well. And she had good reasons to justify it. But when she looked to the cross, she had nothing else that she could do, right? She saw herself also, along with, this person in terms of sinfulness. She recognized that, in her humanity, she is as sinful. And that's one of the things that, we can think of, like when it comes to unforgiveness. One of the reasons that we stay in unforgiveness many times is because we have made whoever is whoever has offended us, right? Like many of you said, we keep thinking about it, right? It takes over our mind, the thoughts of what has happened to us, how they have hurt us, how they have belittled us. All of that stays in our mind, right? And then they assume a different character. They're no longer human. They are monsters for us, right? And as we start to get to that place where we see them in a sense of monstrosity, we lose our own humanity in that sense. We lose our sense of, that I am also a culpable sinner, right? And we start becoming very vindictive because we feel that, now we have the right to judge. And I would never, ever, ever do something like that, And it sort of, it puts you at two totally different poles. And I just happen to any of us. Okay, so the same groups, if you can just turn around and now look at, if you have experienced forgiveness, how has it changed your life? Do you have a story of forgiveness that you can share? Have you given that forgiveness to anybody? How has that changed you? Or if you have received that forgiveness, how has that changed you? So you can speak about that again. You don't necessarily have to share the context, but just how has it helped you, right? So if you can do that, take maybe 3 minutes, yeah? Minute more. A minute more, okay? And we'll wind up.
biggest for me, the changes I started realizing.
Okay. Let's come back. Yeah. Okay, so just like with the earlier time, maybe each of you can just share like a few things that came up, and we'll just pass on the mic.
Okay, how forgiveness changed our life. Few things we looked at was that how relationships suddenly change. Um, we are more wiser from that person's perspective, and we build once we forgive, we build a much more stronger relationship with them, and we become wiser not to fall into that same person kind of a person. And we also looked at how that person changes from a monster to a human being. So yeah.
Yeah, so some of us said that they become more empathetic, they become more sensitive to others' feelings. They suddenly have new perspectives. There's also a free flow of thoughts. They're not constricted by this one thought of revenge or, anything to do with not forgiveness. So it's so hard to forget. So when they're free of that, they have free flow of thoughts and there's freedom in that. Yeah, and
One thing we were saying is when we're all sinners and God has forgiven us, who are we not to forgive others? Yeah, basically, whatever it is, that one thought will always be there in the back of your mind. And until you forgive that person, you won't be able to get past it. Your daily routine is also ruined.
Okay, so commonly what we discussed is inner peace has come more, and we get more time to communicate with God when we forgive.
More time to communicate with God, or you're able to
Yeah,
communicate?
it's like
Yeah.
we are getting more time.
Any other? Anything different? Yeah, there.
I wanted to say from being forgiven, like if I know that somebody has forgiven me, that has really set me free a lot. Like it has given a lot of confidence, and not trying to always blame myself that I have, I'm good for nothing. So when the person forgives, it's a really liberating feeling that way also.
So it's predominantly like that feeling of freedom, right? Freedom in your thoughts, in your emotions, in your relationships with others, and even with God. There's that wall is no longer there. The wall comes crumbling down, right? Like you're free to communicate now. Whether that's in terms of time, like because you before you were obsessed with this thing, right? And now you have the time for other things. I think that's also there, and also there is a you can come now, you can talk freely, be yourself a little bit more, and you can see the other person as human, right? So it changes your perception itself, right? And usually people also say the way they worship God changes completely. And if that's something I've experienced, it's something I have experienced. It changes whatever blocks you in worship. It changes. You hear God's voice much louder, and clearer. And you have a courage of conviction which you do not have before, right? Because before that, you're just, you're always doubting. You can doubt to the point that you can doubt your salvation as well. But when you have that forgiveness, there is literally that conviction that comes to you, and it releases you completely, to be with God and others, and even with yourself, right? Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of different ways of maybe defining forgiveness. And sometimes we think of biblical forgiveness as, we just forgive and then that's about it. There's nothing else. So I know that each of us may have different views and opinions about this. Like, I can forgive the person, but don't let me have anything to do with the person, right? And then for some of us, it's like, no, if we forgive, then, I will remember nothing about the offenses that have been done. And if I even have one vague memory about it, that means I haven't forgiven. So, like, there could be so many different thoughts and ideas that each of us have, okay? But you can take a look at this. In the Bible, we can look at, forgiveness as a two-stage process. And the first stage is mostly, something that you can do, right? And it's something between you and God. It is, where you can offer forgiveness and you offer it freely and wholly, just as God has offered forgiveness to you, right? And it's unconditional. When God, when Christ died on the cross, the offer of forgiveness for all of mankind is unconditional. He presents it to you, he gives it to you as a gift. That is unconditional, right? He says that I'm ready and I'm waiting for you. But then that doesn't complete the forgiveness aspect. That's only one part. The second stage of forgiveness is when the other person repents, right? Because unless we receive that gift, it doesn't become our own. So we can offer forgiveness to somebody. We could be forgiving in our attitude, in our, in just our spirit to another person. But it is still up to the other person also to receive that forgiveness. And forgiveness, all the steps of forgiveness are not complete till the other person also receives that forgiveness. And so the title of this, this talk is Forgiveness and Reconciliation. Many times we can do the first part, The second part, it doesn't depend only on you. It does depend on the other person as well, right? Or if you're the offender, it also depends on you being able to receive forgiveness, right? Only then can we move into a relationship with that person in a proper way, a cooperative relationship. Not that you cannot do something good for the other person, that's not what I'm saying. But to have like a whole relationship with the other person, it requires the other person's partnership with you as well. So another way of looking at this is Chris Braun, who has written the book Unpacking Forgiveness. He says, forgiveness is like a handshake. It's like a, what do you say? It's a, I forgot the exact word that he uses there, but yeah, it's a propositional handshake. It's there. It's like available to you. But you need somebody else to shake your hand, you need the other person to take that hand to complete the steps, okay? So think about this. Some of you may have some different ideas about this, think about how that fits in with your idea of, forgiveness and what you have thought about, biblical forgiveness. Because sometimes we feel like it's just this blanket forgiveness and that's about it. That's it. That's all that there is. I just have to forgive from my mind. And that's it. That's what forgiveness is. But that may not allow you to completely reconcile with a person. Okay. So I'll read this. It's a bit small over there, but I'll just read how John Piper puts it. He says, Jesus said in Luke 17:3-4, "Be on your guard. If your brother sins, rebuke him. If he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times a day and returns to you 7 times saying, 'I repent,' forgive him." So there's a sense in which full forgiveness is only possible in response to repentance. But even when a person does not repent, we are commanded to love our enemy, pray for those who persecute us, and do good to those who hate us. The difference is that when a person who wronged us does not repent with contrition, confession and conversion, that is turning from sin to righteousness, he cuts off the full work of forgiveness. We can still lay down our ill will. We can hand over our anger to God. We can seek to do him good, but we cannot carry through reconciliation or intimacy. So think on that. Maybe some of you differ from this, and if so, like maybe you can bring it up, towards the end, when we have the question and answer time. Okay. So based on that, how would we define forgiveness? Forgiveness is a commitment by the offended, the person who has been hurt, right, to pardon graciously the repentant, the one who is willing to receive that, right, from a moral liability, and to be reconciled to that person, although not all consequences are necessarily eliminated. Okay, so this could change things a little bit from what maybe sometimes, we have some ideas of forgiveness where we say, hey, the other person, they walk scot-free and, they don't have any part in this or something. But that's really not what biblical forgiveness actually says. You can have the attitude of forgiveness. You can be ready to forgive them at any time. Just like think of the prodigal son, right? What happens to the father? The father he's literally just waiting for the son to come. He already has the offer of forgiveness. He's ready. Any moment that the son turns, he will forgive. That's the attitude that we are to have. So when we say that, we are to have an attitude of forgiveness, this part we should definitely have. And this is a thing that we work out with God. It's something we work out personally with God, because while we're waiting for the other person to turn, we might pile up bitterness. Like you said, we might seethe in our mind with all of the things that somebody else has done towards us, right? And we can start building up bitterness. And as one of you said here, after a point, it's not only the offender that needs a healing. Even the offended needs the healing. Right? We also, if we are the ones who have been offended, we start realizing that we need the healing. We are also sinning sometimes as much as, we get into that place where we may also sin as much as somebody who has offended us. We may get to that place. But when we think of the first stage of forgiveness, it is that I go to God and I say that here's, the way that I have been offended. And here's the way that I have offended, whichever way it is. And then you ask God for, forgiveness, or you ask God to help you to stay with an attitude of forgiveness towards the other person, right? And you keep the channel clear between you and God. And you keep, just as, the father runs with open arms, right? You keep your arms wide open so that if the other person turns, you're willing to receive. But the other person has to turn, right? Now, how does the other person turn? This could be something questionable, like each of us could have a different view of this. Yeah, Pastor, you wanted to ask something. Yeah.
Right. So, will all the forgiveness should lead to reconciliation, or is it okay?
Yeah, so we'll come to that. Yeah? Okay. Okay, so the Bible walks us through, a process for, like when we have a conflict with each other, or when we are in unforgiveness with each other, we have a dispute with each other. So I'm not going to be talking about, all other kinds of conflicts and disputes. I'm basically just talking about personal conflict. So we call it the Matthew 18 process, right? Typically, the Matthew 18 process is for people who are Christ followers, mostly within the church and things like that. But if you look at it, there could be some aspects of it which can give us a good clue as to how we should approach anybody, who may have offended us or whom we may have offended. So the first step, is to overlook minor offenses. What are minor offenses? We'll talk about it, okay? Second step is, to talk in private. So the idea is that you keep the circle of, where you work out that forgiveness, as small as possible, right? You don't go tell everybody about this. Whoever it is who has offended you, or whoever you have offended, you talk to that person privately, right? And what if that doesn't work, right? What if you've tried? And trying doesn't, in this way, doesn't mean one time necessarily. It could be that you've spoken to the person a few times, you know. Don't think of this as step 1, 2, 3. It's a very, you know, like, what do you say, like a checklist kind of thing, you know, like I check the box and then it's done. It's not like that. But just think of some phases of it, you know. So first you talk in private to that person. Then next, you know, if that doesn't work, you try to get somebody, right? Like, so sometimes if it's with a friend that you have had a fallout, you try to get another friend, right? If it's in church, like, you know, you might go to somebody who, let's say, you know, you might go to someone in your cell group, you know, or someone, have them also like join you to talk to that person. You know, so if it's in your family, you might get like another relative or something, you know. So think about it like, what if it's your workplace or your college or something? Again, you go to someone else, like, you know, another classmate, someone else, sometimes maybe a mentor or something, you know, you go to them. And then the last 2 phases that they talk about is where you're accountable to authority and you're disciplined by authority. So here we are thinking more in terms of, like, you know, if you think institutionally, we think going to the principal, right? We don't go to the principal right away. Nobody does that, right? So if it's a small personal conflict, if it's something just between the, you know, 1 or 2 people, we try to keep it there as much as possible and resolve it as much as possible. We take as many steps as we can to work it out in the first 3. And only when the first 3 don't work do we go to the principal, right? So I'm giving that as an example, you know, but it could be anything. You think of your office, you know, it's like, say, it's like going to your skip boss or something like that, you know, go to the next level, or your boss. So similarly, like in a church or something, you know, it might be like you going to your elder, your cell group leader, something, you know, somebody, or your pastor, you know. So you go to the next level only when, you know, none of the others have worked. And mostly it depends on what kind of an offense it is, right? Like we said in the beginning, number 1 says overlook minor offenses. We'll talk about what those are, right? So we don't usually use 4 and 5 unless it's really needed, okay? And an exception to this will be, let's say, you know, whether it's in your workplace or like it's in your hostel or it's in the church or somewhere, somebody is blatantly violating a known rule, right? Something that's very obvious, right? Then obviously we don't need to do 1 to 3. We can go straight to 4, right? But I'm talking about personal conflicts otherwise. So I'm just putting this there as a framework, okay? Yeah, so when can we overlook offense? So here, like, you know, it says Proverbs 19:11, good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook an offense. So as much as possible, if, you know, somebody has done something to you, if it is possible to overlook it, we need to take a look at that, you know. Especially if it's something very small, it doesn't really affect your relationship. It doesn't, you know, create any kind of harm to anybody as such. You know, it's not like the person is repeatedly hurting you, right? You know, or sometimes, you know, it's a small thing that has happened and you already know that the other person is going through so much. So I'll give an example. It could be like, you know, somebody losing their temper at you and saying something, you know, that puts you down. But like, if you know that your friend is already having a really hard time in her life, that could be something you could choose to overlook. It's not like something she's doing every day to you, right? So that's an example of a minor offense, right? Or somebody who's just sarcastic with you, or they've done something, you know, especially once or something like that, then those could be things that we can definitely easily overlook. There's no need of any like further procedure or anything like that. You basically look to God, you know, ask for grace, you forgive the person in your mind. You may not even need to bring it up with them. You know, some cases you might, but other cases you may just let it go by, you know, forgiving them by relying on, you know, God's help, right? Also, when the fault is much more yours, right? Like, what if something has, and there's a situation, right? And mostly it's your responsibility. And hey, they have made like one small mistake in that. You're not going to hold that against them. So this is just, you know, a few things. Maybe they might come to you certain things in your mind that, you know, which would come under minor offenses. This happens daily, actually. We let go many minor offenses. But the important thing is, see, if it has bothered you, like that you take that effort of acknowledging it, that it has bothered you, and you consciously forgive that person, and you consciously say that I'm not going to dwell on this. That's how you would give that forgiveness to that person, right? So now, what about offenses that are not minor? When do we know that something is more, right? Especially when you know that it's something that really dishonors God, and it blatantly dishonors God. It is causing a problem, serious problem in your relationship. It makes it hard for you to relate with this person at all, or be with this person, or talk to this person, and it's creating a problem. And then what if, it's really defaming the testimony of that person, right, as a Christian? It could be that. Or if it's causing hurt to others, or sometimes, it's hurting that person itself on several different levels. So in all of these situations, it's not a checklist in the sense that all 4 have to be true. Sometimes it's just one that's true, right? And that can still be an offense that you have to take a little bit more seriously than just think in your mind that I will let it go, Maybe it needs something more, and you can see the verses that I've put on the other side. Like, these are the things that, it talks about in the Bible, where you remember that your brother has aught against you, and you need to go to him and, speak to him about it. Or you recognize that your brother has a problem with you, right? And you need to go to him and, ask for forgiveness. So those are some of the examples of where we need to take it further. Any questions so far before I move on? Yeah, how do you go about it? Yeah, okay, we'll talk about that, okay? So Blessing's question is, what if the person is somewhere far? What if the person is somewhere far? What if after a point the person's no more? There could be a lot of different... So think of all the exceptions and bring it up in your questions, okay? So when you're thinking in terms of, how you can handle any kind of unforgiveness or conflict that you're going through, there are 4 things that you can keep in mind, which can really help you shift the way that you look at this conflict. Very different from how we have been looking at conflict so far, where we are sitting and analyzing the conflict. And we are analyzing all the things that the person has said to us, and we're feeling really bad, or we are like, beating ourselves up for something that we have done. Another way of looking at it would be, how can I glorify God in this situation? So that's, it's called the 4 Gs of peacemaking. How do I glorify God? That's the first one. How do I get the log out of my own eye, right? So it's a personal evaluation. Third one is, how do I restore the other person? They may have done, if they have done something wrong, how do I bring it to their notice, right? And then the 4th one comes to reconciliation. Okay, reconciliation doesn't come right in the beginning. So let's just look at each one. So one key question that we can ask ourselves in any situation remember what I said? Think of that recent conflict you've had, or think of one that you're going through. Have you asked yourself this question: how can I please and honor God in this situation? Okay, and Ephesians 4:1-3 says, live a life worthy of the calling you've received. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Now, one thing you will notice in all the epistles and many times in the scripture, right, Jesus calls us to keep peace, right? And when we say peace, what does he say about peace? The peace that I give you is different from how the world gives, okay? So it's not the way that we are thinking about peace, right? It's the way that he defines peace. But almost every epistle starts either with a prayer for peace or it ends with a prayer for peace. That's how important peace is to God, right? And he also says that, when my followers live in unity and live in peace, that is the greatest witness to the world that you are Christians. So when we are not having that situation, and when we are carrying that unforgiveness, and when we have a broken relationship, what we are doing is also, we are also tarnishing our image as a Christian as well. So that's the reason why we would even bother to, work on this, right? So the first thing is asking yourself, how can I please God in this situation, right? And I've bolded thing which says make every effort. So the word that is used for make every effort over there, so they say that, in the Greek, it is like the word that is used for in the Roman days, like the gladiators, when they used to go into the arena, right? It's like, they would tell each other, or the main trainer will tell the other person, make every effort. That word, whatever the Greek word is, he uses that to stay alive. Because, you have to come out alive, right? So he makes every effort. It's a desperate attempt, right? To stay alive. He doesn't want to die, right? It's that kind of effort that God is calling us to put to keep the bond of peace. When I read that, like, I know what it did to me. Like, I was like, wow. I mean, I don't think I even think about it like this at all, but that's how seriously God takes this. So Chuck Swindoll, he says about, conflict or some trouble that you're going through with other people in relationship. He says during that time, if you listen to the voices around you, you'll search for a substitute, an escape route. You'll miss the fact that each one of these problems is a God-appointed instructor, ready to stretch you and challenge you and deepen your walk with Him. Growth and wisdom await you at the solution of each one, the pain and mess notwithstanding. Now think of the person that you're in conflict with, or who's who has an issue with you, right? And what if you were to ask yourself, how would you see this conflict if you saw it as an assignment from a perfectly loving and all-powerful God? How would that change how you looked at this? By this, I'm in no way saying that God made you do the things you did or the other person do the things they did. That's not at all what I'm saying. But God, in His sovereignty, has allowed you to go through this difficult time. He has not stopped it, right? And we are in it. We are in it, and we are going through the mess of it. We are going through the pain of it. And all of the time, like, what we are thinking about is, how do we prove that we are right? Right? How do I make it clear that the other person is a fool, right? He's done me wrong or whatever. Like these are the types of thoughts that generally go through our mind. Or we take a thing that, maybe I'm the good Christian, so I'm suffering and all that kind of stuff. But how does, how would it change? How would your attitudes, your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors change if you saw this conflict as an assignment from a loving God? Right? And an all-powerful God, right? Loving because He can turn around your hate. All-powerful because He can actually put an end to this conflict right away, right? He can vanquish your enemy if He wants to. And what good might come about if you respond to this conflict in a biblical manner? So we all know, like, our conflicts, our unforgiveness, they come due to many different reasons, and at least 4 broad reasons are, like your misunderstandings that happen. Most of them fit in this category. All the daily ones that we go through, it's because of just a misunderstanding, it's because of poor communication, and especially today when we lead busy lifestyles, most of it is just that we have not communicated properly, or we have understood wrongly, right? Majority of them, I think, would fit in A. Then a whole lot of them would fit under B, which is, we just have different ways of doing things. We have a different personality. We have different priorities and expectations, So, or we have different interests. And then sometimes it's also because, we are competitive about things, right? There are limited resources for things, limited, things that we need to get into. And like, instead of being supportive, instead of finding a way to help the other person, we are looking for our own selfish interests in that, right? And then the last one is our own sinful attitudes, right? And habits. So the first 3, we all know. The last one, even if it stems from the first 3, sometimes it's the last one that actually aggravates the whole thing. Or even the conflict may not have started from any sinful attitude of yours, but in the process of dealing with that conflict, you may actually approach it with a sinful attitude, and your own sin could come in the way. And, just as we read in James, what causes quarrels and fights, right? They come from the desires that battle within us, right? So that brings us to something. Whenever we are looking at unforgiveness, we need to start from us, right? We need to, even if it's a hurt that's caused by somebody else and we are like majorly looking at that, when we look at the situation, it would be important for us to first look at ourselves before we go to the other person, right? So ask yourself, how can I show Jesus' work in me by taking responsibility for my part in this conflict? And, sometimes we don't think we have any part. So we may not know till we actually look into it, right? It will take some time for us to actually evaluate what that is. So you could check the previous, categories that I mentioned. Is it just that I misunderstood something? I haven't done something that I should have done, what they expected me to do. Is it because I'm not able to gel, with that other person because of something? So we can evaluate those things. But then we can also ask ourselves, as I have been going through this conflict, this difficulty, how have I been using my tongue? During this time where I'm going through the difficulty with this person, how have I been using my tongue? Have I been gossiping about this person? Have I been giving it back to them in sarcasm, or like we say, right? Like I know how to give it back, and we feel proud about it, right? And you can also look at, how have you been trying to control the other person in this process, right? While you're going through this situation. Are you breaking any commitment that you have made to them? Right? Maybe they were expecting you to keep your end of something, or you promised something and you haven't been doing that. As you're going through this conflict, are you disrespecting authority? Right? So that can be any authority. That could be like in your college, it could be at your workplace. Could you also be misusing authority? This happens a lot in companies, right? We misuse authority, like we play into manipulating others' thoughts, our bosses, and all of that, currying favor, etc., against another person, or that kind of thing. Are we forgetting the golden rule? Right? What is the golden rule? Do to others as you would have them do to you, right? And then when you evaluate your actions with this other person, would you be okay if that person did to you the same thing that you are right now doing to that person, right? Are you serving any sinful desires, right? And here it's like, it might be anything, right? It could be like you want something good, but you want it so badly that you will do anything to get it. So it could be the promotion, it could be, that particular project in your college, something, it could be anything that you really want and you're trying to get that. It can be other sinful desires as well, right? Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, anything else that you can think of, Are you loving something more than God? Are you fearing something more than God? Are you trusting something more than God? Right? So we can ask ourselves this. This is still stage 1, right? What stage 1 of forgiveness? Like I said, the bitterness starts to pile up, right? And we are going through all that overthinking, and we're cutting off, and we're lashing out, and all of that. And that's when we need to evaluate, what have we been doing, even if we think that we have nothing to do with this conflict. So here, actually Abel is the one who, so as I was preparing for this presentation, I thought of Abel. This is not Abel's foot, by the way. But like this kept coming to me, because I asked him the last week, how are your toes after the surgery? And he said, yeah, it's fine. It's all healed up. But I'm just wearing the bandage so that, other people don't step on it, right? Like, and that got me thinking, right? See, when you have something physical, like a physical injury or something like that, we can put a Band-Aid on it. And everybody knows not to step on it. But there's so many things within us that are injuries, right? Wounds that we carry, sensitivities that we carry because of our history that nobody sees. And you can't really wear a bandage to show somebody that. You might be still recovering from it. Like he said, oh, like one of the toes, like it's still paining a little bit. So I know it's not completely done. I know it's not completely healed. So there could be some that you're still in the process of recovering from. There can be ones that, you feel like, okay, yeah, it's done, it's closed up mostly, that kind of thing. But to be hurt again in that area would be like, too much. Okay, so think of that, like all of us have those kind of sensitivities. And sometimes having those sensitivities, we may find that, we repeatedly get offended by people in strange situations. It's like there's no reason why it doesn't, sometimes it's not even intentional towards us or anything, but small things trigger us off, right? And that becomes an issue, and that becomes a conflict, and then we start storing up the unforgiveness. And it can be the same with the other person as well. You may have a friend, you may have a family member who gets ticked off just like that, right? And again and again and again, and you don't know why, right? Then mostly we are doing what, Abel said, he doesn't want you to do. You're stepping on their toe, right? Except that it's not their toe. It's their heart, right? So something else is going on. And I just thought I would bring this part in now. Maybe some people would put this under sinful attitudes, things like that, But I would say it could become a sinful attitude after some time, but initially it's just a vulnerability that you have. It's a weakness that you have because of what you have already gone through, because of the hurt that you have already gone through. And it's good to take time to recognize that in yourself. Realize why you are losing, like your fuse is going off. Why is the other person's fuse going off so much, right? And if we take the time to evaluate that and bring that before God, that is one way that we can take the log out of our eye as well, because God can give us a complete healing for that as well. He can work in us on that. And being freed from that can, relieve us of so much guilt, so much shame that we could carry just because, we're not able to let go. We also sometimes may not even realize why are we getting hurt by this particular person, this particular thing, this particular situation, right? And why would we do all of this, right? Go through the difficulty of, removing the log from our eyes. It says, if a man cleanses himself from sin, he will be an instrument for noble purposes, made holy, useful to the master, and prepared to do any good work, right? So the reason we would pursue forgiveness with God, the reason that we would evaluate the areas that we are hurting the other person or we are contributing to the conflict is that ultimately we want to fulfill our Father's purpose, right? We want to be effective vessels in His hands, effective instruments in His hands, and carrying that unforgiveness blocks that. This I already went through. Now, as I mentioned that, forgiveness is a handshake, right? It involves two people, right? So what if, you realize that the other person, you've evaluated yourself, you've worked through some of the things that you have gone through, you've asked God for forgiveness, right? But then you need to go to the other person as well, right? And you need to confess what you have done. Or you have to, we call it apology, we say sorry and all of that, but sorry doesn't cut it sometimes, right? We've all said sorry, and we've all had other people say sorry to us where we don't feel very good after that, right? You just feel like, yeah, you just said it because you had to say it, that kind of thing. So that can also stop the process of forgiveness, right? So here, I'm just looking at a few things that can help you say this sorry more effectively, right? Don't think of it as a formula, but as you are preparing to go to somebody, and if you're wanting to take ownership of what you have done, right? Just see if, you are actually taking into account some of these things. So as we said, address the people who are involved, not somebody else, right? Just go to the people who are involved only, right? And avoid any excuses, right? Like we say, I'm sorry, but you made me angry. I do this with my kids. So, but it's not, it makes the other person mad, right? Because you're not actually confessing anything, right? So if you're going to say if, but, and, maybe, and all of that, then you haven't actually owned your part in that conflict, right? So how would you say it without that? How would you actually take ownership without giving any excuse whatsoever, right? And admitting, the specific things you have done, not just what you have done, the attitude behind it as well. So it might be that, you say, well, I'm sorry I didn't talk to you, right? Okay, that's what you did. But maybe the attitude behind it was, I think I was like, feeling I think I was going through some pride myself, and I just felt that how you treated me last time, wasn't good. So I took things, into my own hands, and I decided to punish you, kind of thing. So you may say something more. Say something more about your attitude behind that action, right? What prompted you to take that action, and that's the more important thing. Also, acknowledge the pain or the hurt of the other person. So sometimes we don't do this. And I've worked with a lot of people in counseling where they've got the sorry and all of that from the people who have hurt them, especially like when it's family and all of that. So we'll say sorry, but then we don't really acknowledge, sorry, but then I didn't hurt you that much. No, it's okay, let's go on, right? So they're never happy with that, right? At some later point, it comes back because you've not been able to fully say that, you know what, I'm deeply sorry that I wounded you, I needed to have been there for you and I wasn't there. You expected this from me and it would have been right for me to do this, but I, gave up my responsibility in that time. I was lazy, I was whatever, So you really need to acknowledge and talk about like how it affected them, like what did it do to them. So you need to talk about that, and then accept the consequences. In this, like think of Zacchaeus in the Bible. He doesn't just accept the forgiveness from Jesus, or he goes on to forgive the people that, he goes on to say that he will make amends with the people that, he has hurt. So, he's willing to accept the consequences, right? So whatever consequences you can, there are things that we cannot go back and change, right? We cannot replace all the hurt, right? But we could do something kind for them. We could ask them, what would you like me to do? Right? Sometimes they want something specific, so you could ask that. Sometimes there is a material damage or something involving some kind of material thing, like in the Zacchaeus case, it's money, right? So you may want to see how you can replace that, etc., right? And then alter your behavior, right? It doesn't mean that after you've said sorry, that you can go back to however you were before, right? I'm sorry, and then like, I already said sorry, there's nothing else. It's closed chapter, right? It's closed chapter on the last incident, but now it's an open chapter for a renewed way of being. And unless, it also means a renewed way of being for you, then you have not actually confessed and taken ownership of what you have done. So you could struggle in changing your behavior, that's okay, right? You may have to sometimes go back and admit that struggle as well. But are you making efforts towards that, right? Are you showing that you are changing your behavior and, working on it? And then, ask them, would you be willing to forgive me? Right? Sometimes just hearing that from the other person is also really needed. Give them the opportunity to say it. And then give time, because not everybody is going to say, yeah, I accept what you say. They may not. They may not say anything. Sometimes some people need to be given time, right? They need to be given time to process whatever you have told them. They need to sit with it. They need to think whether do you really mean what you mean, and then only would they be able to, kind of come back and give you that forgiveness. Yeah, and I know like our time is a little out, but just a couple more slides and we are done. The next part is when you've done the first part, which is, you going and owning your part in the conflict, there could definitely be a part that the other person has played in the conflict, right? And you want to bring that up as well, right? How can I lovingly serve others by helping them to take responsibility for their part? So as Pastor mentioned today, right, having somebody who also corrects you, right, who also shows. Now, this is not about correction in the way of like taking a high-handed approach. That's really not what it means. You are still going to the person humbly, right? And it uses the word gently restore, right? You're going to them in love, and you are looking for a way to, share with them, this is your part in the conflict. This is how I've also been hurt by you. And you want to put that forward. And when you do this, the thing is, sometimes we think like the only way we can do this is just directly confront the person. You just spit out the truth, this is what it is, and sometimes they may be able to take that or not. But we could take some biblical examples of how people have approached difficult conversations, right? You can think of Daniel. How did he negotiate for something with the king, right? When he finds a creative way of going about it, something, So that's not an example of forgiveness aspect, but what I'm trying to say is like, you can always come up with a creative way of doing it. Even if you think of, Nathan going to David. Nathan first goes with a story, right? And he elaborates that story and he puts it forward to the king. And that allows the king to really see what happened and his part in the whole thing. And then if you think of Esther, right? She wants to bring up something with the king. Now, that's again not a direct thing of unforgiveness, but again, we're talking about difficult conversations where you want the other person to own their part and do something, right? So she literally has the conversation over 3 days, right? She throws a party, a couple of times, and then, just is nice to the king and all of that, and then she broaches the topic, right? So come up with, think and plan of a way how you would actually reach this person, especially if the person is a difficult person to, like, they don't see their part in the conflict at all. They do not understand what they have done. Right? So if it's very obvious, or if it's somebody you're really close to, you could just bring it up, like if it's a small thing. But think of a very big thing, or think of something that has been going on for some time. How would you bring it up? It's very difficult to do that. The other person may not even have a clue sometimes, right? So you do need to plan, you do need to think of a winsome way that you can actually get them on board with it, without condemning them, right? And do it in love, and plan your words so that you avoid the misunderstanding as well, right? And as you're doing that, give the other person the best chance. Think positively about the person, right? Think the best about the person. Don't view them in a negative way, because surely your words, your actions will also come out that way. If you are just thinking about the person in a hateful way the whole time and you cannot believe anything good about the person, then this conversation is not going to go well. And at the end of it, like, also recognize your limits. Sometimes we do all that we can to help another person see their part in the conflict, but they may not get it. And they may not want to own it. They may get it, but they may not want to own it. And in that case, we can't force them. We may have to go to them many times. We can take some different opportunities to bring it up with them. But in the end, only God can change somebody's heart. And if they are not responding to your words, if they're not responding to your efforts to show them what has gone wrong, you really do need to pray that God will speak to them. And why would we do all this? If we look at the, Galatians 6:1, where it says gently restore, the word restore over there, the Greek word which is used, right? It means, to mend or restore a broken person to usefulness in God's kingdom. And that's such a beautiful thing, right? The reason you would go to somebody and show them their fault is not because you're trying to prove anything of yourself or anything of your selfish interest. That's not the only reason. The reason is you would want them to ultimately be of, in right standing with God. You would want them to fulfill their purpose, the purpose that God has for them, okay? Yeah, so when we say that we forgive, we should be able to give 4 promises, essentially. What do we mean by forgive? When you say that you're sorry, it means that you will not dwell on this incident, right? You're not going to let it consume you. You're actively, whenever it starts to come into your mind, you're going to actively replace it with good thoughts, right? And this, if we are still in stage 1, we can do this for sure, dwell on this incident. The next 3, we can only do when the other person also turns towards us, right? It's not possible for us to never bring up this incident, if the other person has not repented, right? Or, never talk to the other people about it, or, never let it come in the way of our relationship. That might be difficult if you do not see any turning from the other person towards, also receiving that forgiveness or being repentant about it. But when the other person repents, then we can say, I will not dwell on this incident. I will not bring this up, again and again, repeatedly, or use it against you. I will not talk to others. I will not go around gossiping about this, right? And I will not let this incident hinder us from a personal relationship. So it means that now we can take steps towards reconciliation, right? So that's what we mean when we biblically think of forgiveness, because this is what God does for us. When He forgives us, He doesn't bring up the incident again and again. It doesn't mean He forgets. I don't think that's what it means, okay? Because even we also don't forget, So even if it's there, He's not going to dwell on it. He's not going to bring it up again and again, and He's not going to let it hinder the relationship that we have, right? And the last step is, go and be reconciled. So, if you have already confessed your part, if you have already brought up the other person's part, the other person is also repentant. So 2 people who are, owning their part in the conflict and giving and receiving the forgiveness, then reconciliation is very much possible. How can I demonstrate the forgiveness of God and encourage a reasonable solution to conflict? So ask this of yourself, right? And so it starts by, we have to put away the hostility, put away all the thoughts of separation in us, and replace that with peace and friendship. That's what it means to reconcile, right? And we're giving a chance to the other person to show their repentance and regain trust, because it takes time to regain trust. It doesn't mean that, today if they say, they confess their sins and they ask for forgiveness, it doesn't mean that tomorrow, everything is going to go back to, move forward very fast. So sometimes it may take some time for the other person to really show you that, hey, I am repentant on this. And it's a period of time that happens where you need to regain the trust. And you need to give that opportunity when you go in for reconciliation. And also decide, which consequences you will take on and which the other person will give. There are consequences that your offender will never be able to, maybe do anything about, and we can rely on God, to just absorb those consequences. We just accept that that is what it is. God helps us to do that. No other way that we can do it, right? And sometimes, we recognize that this consequence is such a weight on that person that, if there's a way that you can do away with it, even though it maybe rightfully the person could, maybe they could also work towards it. Like, for example, if they owe you a heavy debt, you can cut down the debt, right? Now, similarly, you can think of other things. If you don't want them to maybe go and do something that maybe hurts them more, or just to kind of make you feel good. So if there is something that you can absorb in that, and if God gives you the heart to do that, as you're praying, then you can go ahead and do that. But there will definitely be things that the other person has to take up as a consequence for you to regain the trust, right? There has to be certain things, if they have a responsibility towards, you would actually be expecting them to take up that responsibility. Yeah, and we do still, even after the forgiveness is given, we need to still look at ways to solve the issue as well. There might be some material issues that need to be taken care of. Maybe it's a difference of opinion on something, the difference of plans that don't coincide. We still need to come up with a different way of handling it. So you do need to do some brainstorming for that and come up with a creative solution, right? And finally, this is not an event, it's a process. It's both an event and a process, like asking and receiving forgiveness. And it doesn't stop there. It sometimes keeps going on. And sometimes there can be, you've tried everything from your end, but it doesn't work out. The other person is not ready. And you will need to maybe repeat these steps many times, a few times. It might not be like, you're going continuous days or anything like that. You may need to give a time. You will also have to work on how you're dealing with the bitterness in yourself, right? So it might be that with some people, especially with, say, our family members, sometimes close friends, people that we cannot just eliminate from our lives, right? Other people you can walk away, or you can change this if the person is no longer interested in pursuing the relationship. But you may not do that with people that are closest to you always, right? So it might be a repeated effort that you may be doing. And where it says in Matthew 18:15, go and be reconciled with your brother, that word go is a continuous verb. So it's not a one-time thing. And that's something important to think about. God is not expecting us to, do any kind of magic or something. He will do the magic. But in the meantime, it can be a painful process. It can also be a simple one. If we recognize, early on in the conflict, what is our part, and we're willing to admit that and, take the corrective steps. And if we are willing to also take the corrective steps with the other person, if needed, if it's a minor offense, you're just letting it go with God's help. But if it's more than that, if you are willing to approach the other person and bring it, the conflict doesn't need to continue. And it can be very simple. So many of our conflicts can actually be resolved this way. But there definitely are ones that, it may be difficult. And, Blesson gave the example here, what if somebody is far away? Good point, right? If somebody is really far away, what if, far away is one. Sometimes the other person is in no position to, that maybe it's their health condition, maybe they are dying, maybe they have already passed away, and you have recognized things a little later. How do you work on this? You can definitely do stage 1, right? And you can commit that to God. That's basically it. And I think you can, how this man said in Corrie ten Boom's thing, he said, I was praying for an opportunity to meet one of my victims. And so sometimes, that's what you pray. But there's no hard and fast this thing. First of all, if they're far away, maybe, the chance of you having that kind of relationship with them may be limited, if there are other reasons as well. Right? So yeah, that's also what I would say. Yeah, and finally, like I mentioned, whatever the situation, whether the other person accepts your forgiveness or not, Romans 12:19 to 21 says, do not take revenge, my friends. Leave room for God's wrath. Right? The wrath is not in your hands, it's in the hands of God. Right? He decides what he will do with this. You commit the situation to God. If the other person is completely unrepentant, insistent on hurting you again and again, there are things that, you may need to do to protect yourself in those situations. But you still maintain an attitude of keeping the doors open for, if the person repents, how would you be? Right? You keep that readiness. That is between you and God. And if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Yeah, so that brings me to the end of my presentation. I know it's a bit of time,